Hello, everyone, and welcome to This Week in Fantasy Baseball. I'm John Coe, joined as always by my co host, Patrick Fitzgerald. In this episode, we're going to go over the latest news and notes around baseball, recap the hitter and pitcher performances from this past week, and of course, stream recommendations at the end of the show. Before we get into all of that, Patrick, how are you doing?
Hey John, I'm doing pretty well. My Orioles got a shutout win over the Yankees today, which is always good to see, especially after they thoroughly dominated us in a four-game series about a week or two ago. So got a little revenge, still a little under 500, but hoping they'll work their way back up. How are you?
I'm doing all right. The Twins, we're going to talk about it a little bit later, but Bailey Ober had a great start yesterday. And right now they're down 4-2 to the Marlins, but Byron Buxton has two solo homers, so that seems to be fine, I guess. Was Bradish pitching today? I think I saw that he was going, but I wasn't 100% sure.
Yeah, six scoreless. So he had a good, I think, 7 innings, 10 Ks against the A's last start. So it seems like he is getting back on track, which is great to see.
Yeah, he's kind of been teetering on my cut list. I've been trying to figure out a pitcher to drop in order to bring Sonny Gray back from the injured list, and I was kind of banking on today being the day that helped me decide whether Bradish was going to stay on that roster or not. But it sounds like he needs to be on there for a couple more weeks at least.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, yeah, I'd say at this point, if Kyle Bradish is your last cut, you got a pretty good pitching staff there. Because I know the whip is bad, but I think he's turning a corner a little bit.
Right? Yeah, I think it's like kind of between him, Connolly early, Trey Yesavage, like a bunch of like fun pitchers, and Sonny Gray is also just boring enough that he just might be the cut as well in that situation. But yeah, it's fantasy is interesting right now. It's kind of that weird part of the season where everything feels like it's in flow, but we've got a lot of interesting people getting called up, and then also a lot of important players also getting hurt. So it's kind of just a mix of like really important roster decisions, even though it's really only what a third of the way, not even a third of the way through the season.
Yep, head can definitely start spinning a little bit. Trying to keep track of all these promotions and the injuries, but also a lot of guys working their way back. So it's important to try to stay on top of things as best you can.
Yeah. Well, that's hopefully what we can do with this podcast. But before we get into the rest of the episode, just a reminder that you can follow us on Twitter at ThisWeekPL. You could send us your fantasy baseball questions to our email at thisweekplpod@gmail.com. Lastly, make sure you subscribe to or follow the podcast on whatever streaming platform you listen to. We're on all of them: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. Wherever you listen, make sure you follow us and leave a 5-star review if you enjoy the show. We are recording this on Wednesday, May 13th. So it's going to be a couple days before this episode comes out. So some of this information hopefully isn't too outdated in terms of the injury news and notes, but still important, especially some of the stuff related to rehab starts definitely still relevant as you try to plot out how to set up your team in preparation for maybe guys that are coming off the injured list. But we're going to start with placements, and my goodness, I was really surprised by the first name on the board. Robby Snelling of the Miami Marlins just literally got called up last week. Um, Ends up getting a UCL sprain, which who knows what that could be. But I'm kind of just curious before we even get into the kind of the consequences of this situation. Did you try to pick up Robby Snelling anywhere after his start on Friday, I believe?
Yeah, I think I had him in our pitcher list league like for a stream, and the results were a little inconsistent, and the league's pretty shallow, so I was just kind of churning the spots. I moved on. I think someone else already did add him, but obviously he'll be on the IL now, which is unfortunate. Hopefully it's not the worst case scenario.
Yeah, I don't think he either had already gotten picked up in my TGFBI league. That's the only real league that I think I can be tracking fab like this. But I had picked him up, I think, in a head-to-head league as well, just to kind of see what he was doing. It was all right, nothing to write home about. But yeah, definitely a big impact for a guy who I think a lot of people were hoping Miami was going to call him up sooner rather than later. And as soon as he gets called up, immediately gets hit by the UCL sprain, which is super unfortunate.
Yeah, it's like, a few days after his start, so I wonder if maybe he was just not recovering great and they had to do imaging or something. But yeah, I think he went for between 150 and $200 of fab in both of my OCs. So those people are, I don't think the process was bad in the bids, but obviously the result, is going to be pretty disappointing.
Yeah. As for other injury news, Francisco Alvarez of the Mets, he is on the 10-day IL with a right knee meniscus tear. Best case scenario for return is 4 to 6 weeks, but depending on what they decide to do to repair that tear, it could be a little bit longer of a return for him. Rhett Lauder of the Reds, he is hitting the 15-day IL with right shoulder pain, but the Reds are optimistic for his return. Jose Caballero of the Yankees, he's going on the 10-day IL with a fractured finger, but apparently no tendon or ligament damage as a result of this injury. So it shouldn't be too long for him to return. He is expected to stay on as the starting shortstop once he returns as well, which I think is an interesting thing that I believe Brian Cashman said that. Of course, Sean Murphy of Atlanta, he's going on 10-day IL with also a fractured finger, but he's going to be out for 8 weeks because that's just how baseball is. Just different injuries have different healing times for different players. And Murphy already wasn't really doing that much in terms of fantasy. Drake Baldwin is still going to get the bulk of the starts there at the catcher position. And then finally, Jacob Wilson of the A's going on the 10-day IL with a left shoulder subluxation, I think.
Yeah, so
Uh,
subluxation. It's
there we go.
like
Yeah.
dislocation, fancy term for dislocation. Like it popped
Okay.
out. Not it's a little
Yeah,
scary.
that's right. Yeah. No timeline for his return, but obviously that's not a fun thing to come back from. I don't know if I saw a corresponding move for that yet. So we'll see what the A's end up doing. But I know they did call up Henry Bolte, who we're going to talk about in a little bit. In terms of returns from the injury list, Pete Fairbanks of the Marlins, he is back from nerve irritation in his pitching hand. Expect him to be the de facto closer there in Miami. And Bryce Miller is returning from the 15-day IL. He's going to be in a piggyback situation with Luis Castillo. I know we talked about this last week with regards to Emerson Hancock, but it sounds like they're at least going to do a piggyback with him and Castillo right now. And Miller got up to around 60 pitches in his last rehab start, so still slowly getting built up. He is the opener in today's game against Houston, I believe. But being the opener is kind of unfortunate because it means he's probably only going to go like 4 innings. That's going to limit his fantasy value in terms of getting wins. Obviously, he can still do well in ratios and strikeouts. But what's your thoughts on rostering Bryce Miller with this kind of pitching situation that the Mariners have going on?
Yeah, I'm definitely interested, even if it is a piggyback situation. I think they're going 6 man this week, and then they're going to change to 5 man, and he could be, affected by that. He's through 3 scoreless right now, it looks like, but he really weird. He 3 scoreless. I think it might be 3 perfect innings, but he has one with, even though he's sitting 98 on his fastball, which is up 3 ticks from last year. So the stuff looks a lot better, but in this tiny, tiny sample, it's not really getting any swing and misses. So I guess we'll see what the final line ends up looking like. But yeah, I think I'd add him pretty much anywhere just to see, we know what kind of heights he's capable of at his best.
Yeah, I have him, as I mentioned last week. I have him stashed in the league. Don't think I might have actually started him in this start. It is a wins league, so it's a little unfortunate. But also, I think he wouldn't have any value. He wouldn't have more value, I guess, in a quality start league with this whole piggyback situation. So, definitely something to look at with Seattle and how they're going to manage their rotation. In other injury news, Josh Hader of the Astros, he threw a scoreless inning in his latest rehab appearance. No StatCast data on that. Expect him to still be kind of going through rehab for quite a bit before he returns to the Major League roster. Jeremy Pena, his teammate, is starting his minor league rehab from a hamstring injury. He was dealing with a previous injury. I think it was it a broken finger? I think it was a broken finger that he like jammed or something right before the WBC started. But he's likely to return to the team either this weekend or early next week. Jared Jones of the Pirates, he got up to 52 pitches in his most recent rehab start. He is returning from elbow surgery, so his possible return right now is end of May or the start of June. Thinking about Jones, I wouldn't be surprised if he's already stashed somewhere in leagues that have ILs, but is this a guy who you'd be looking to target, let's just say like in an NFC format where, there's no IL, like likely Jones is on the waiver wire? Is this someone that you'd want to be looking at when he gets back from the injured list?
Yeah, definitely. It's based on the format in NFBC. If you didn't get drafted or added during the first fab period, he's not eligible until he returns. So you better get your fab dollars ready. It's possible that he was dropped by someone who was trying to stash him and ran out of space. So always double check. But yeah, you might have to save up some fab dollars if you want to go get Jared Jones in a couple weeks when he comes back.
Yeah. Someone else returning from elbow surgery, that'd be Garrett Cole, of the Yankees. Likely 1 to 2 more rehab starts for him, but the level for that next start not yet announced. Obviously, we're all hoping AAA so we can get StatCast data on Cole, but yeah, it's still going to be a little bit before he returns. Of course, he's only on the 15-day IL, so the Yankees don't necessarily have any sort of timetable in terms of, oh, he's off the 60-day, now we can bring him back. So this is more about him progressing from his return from injury rather than there being any clock on his actual return. But Andrew Woodruff of the Brewers, he's dealing with shoulder inflammation. He's planning to throw a bullpen session on Thursday, and I think based on how that goes, the Brewers will decide whether he needs a rehab start or if he can just kind of come back to the team. Casey Mize of the Tigers, he had a setback he's starting to face live hitters in live BP. No word yet on what his rehab is going to look like, but Detroit obviously dealing with some depth issues with their rotation, so they'd like to have Mize back as soon as possible. Gavin Lux of the Rays, he's got a setback in his minor league rehab assignment, dealing with another shoulder injury as he comes back. Luis Robert Jr. of the Mets, he is not progressing as quickly as expected from his herniated disc situation, and so it looks like it's going to be still some time before he returns. He had like a really nice start to the beginning of the season, but I think at like the last month, it really had slowed down, and maybe that was because of this injury with the herniated disc. Clayton Beeter of the Nats, he is starting his rehab assignment and looks like he probably could be the closer when he returns. Gus Varland did not have a good week. And so Beeter was the closer before going down with injury, so would not be surprised if when he returns, he takes that job back. And Quinn Priester of the Brewers, he's starting his rehab assignment after getting shut down in his last rehab start on the first. And so I don't think the Brewers are necessarily trying to rush him back. They do have a pretty good stable of pitches with their rotation, but it would be nice to have some backup, obviously. But yeah, he is coming back and hopefully is able to kind of go through the full rehab before coming back to the majors.
Yep, I'm hoping, like you said, Garrett Cole. We need to see him in AAA. The results have been a little uneven so far in the rehab, and Max Fried just left his start today with elbow soreness, which is pretty scary for the Yankees fans out there. So yeah, it'd be nice to see him in AAA and then in the majors soon enough. I just want to see that stuff hopefully close to what we come to expect from Garrett Cole.
All right, moving on to other prospect news. Ryan Waldschmidt of the Diamondbacks, he got called up, is currently 4 for 14 with 1 run, 3 RBI. He's batting ninth. I paid a lot for him in NFC, and I'm currently doubting whether that's a good thing or not, but we'll see as the season goes on. AJ Ewing, he got called up for the Mets. He's currently batting eighth, batted yesterday and today's game. Could be the everyday center fielder. We'll see how the Mets use him, especially with this, Luis Robert Jr. is, they could use some more support, obviously, in their outfield. Henry Bolte of the A's, he got his contract selected on Tuesday. He will be batting fifth in his debut today on Wednesday. Mostly known for speed, although he does have some power. He had 12 homers in the PCL this season, which, is more of a hitter-friendly environment. That being said, he plays his home games in Sacramento, so it's going to feel pretty normal for him, at least when he's playing at home, in terms of what his power could do. Unfortunately for him, though, I believe he's a righty, right? So he could be stuck mostly on the short side of the platoon. But like we talked about last week with Tyler Soderstrom, he's been struggling against lefties. So maybe Bolte kind of is the other side of the platoon for Soderstrom, which could eat into Soderstrom's playing time. Not sure if that's necessarily going to be the case right now, but just something to monitor for sure. And then Anthony Volpe, he is recalled due to the Caballero injury, but I wouldn't necessarily go out and try to grab him right now unless you're in like a really deep league, mainly because it sounds like Caballero is going to get his job back anyways when he returns. So Volpe could have a very short stint in the major leagues, even if he proves himself in the 2 weeks that he is on the major league roster.
Yeah, I don't think he needs to be on your radar. And in terms of the prospects, I'd say Waldschmidt's kind of the most well-rounded, I guess I would say. Ewing is the speed, kind of play. Both of them, though, do seem to have paths to close to everyday jobs, which will be valuable. And then Bolte is in a little bit of a tougher spot. Maybe he can siphon some games from Lawrence Butler, who's really struggling and playing some center field for the Athletics. And he has the highest, ceiling. I think he has like 12 homers and 17 steals or something in AAA, which is just a ridiculous pace. But if he's only playing half the games, it's going to be tough to roster him.
Yeah, and the power's kind of weird too for Bolte because it's been really good this year, And in previous years though, it hasn't been necessarily like incredible. So maybe it's something that has slowly developed for him this season, but just something to monitor too, just for him. Like he has had a lot of speed. He's stolen plenty of bases in the minors, as most minor leaguers who have speed do. But the power has kind of just shown up this year, so that's just something to consider as he, starts playing against major league pitching.
Right. He hits a ton of ground balls still, so definitely, a very raw hitter still at this point.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's going to wrap it up for our injury news and notes section. Hopefully, some of this gets resolved before the episode comes out on Saturday. But most likely, a lot of these guys going through rehab are still going to be going through rehab. So maybe the only players likely returning, before this episode comes out, it's like Jeremy Pena, maybe Brandon Woodruff. We'll see what that bullpen session on Thursday looks like for him. And yeah, hopefully, a lot of these guys are able to progress because yeah, some of these are really big pitching names. Obviously, it'd be nice to have them back in the majors. All right, so moving on to player performances. Who do we have starting on May 8th?
Yep. So starting on the eighth, high velocity rail for Luke Raley was Ryan Clark's hitter recap. I believe it was a 2 homer, 7 RBI day for Luke Raley. So awesome day. I'm streaming him this week because he's facing all righties, but I'm going to talk about a more high profile guy. That's Rafael Devers, Giants first baseman, utility. He was 2 for 4 with a home run, 2 runs, and an RBI. And it might finally be time for Devers to break out of his horrific slump that he had to start the season. Second season in a row, actually, really struggling to start. Devers has not really been the same guy since he got traded to San Francisco. He's shown flashes, but it doesn't seem like he's fully adjusted to the environment. But sometimes it's only one good game or one good week to completely change your stat line this time of year. And Devers has been playing better lately. His home run was actually only a homer in Oracle Park, which is kind of funny given, the pitcher-friendly dimensions there. But he did also have a single to add to the tally. So, yeah, I know that you spoke about Devers when he had a guest on a few weeks ago when I was out. So I just wanted to, check in on him a few weeks later and see he has been hitting a little bit better. So are you feeling more optimistic? Or is this just kind of, the regression that we expected from Devers and his your opinion of his long-term outlook is still a little bit more negative than it was at the beginning of the season?
Yeah, I think for Devers, I mean, it kind of just goes with the territory where you kind of just expect like a player of his caliber to just be who they are, right? There's not too many things that can change in their makeup. I know, I mean, on that episode, we did talk about how like some of the mental aspects of the game might be affecting Devers a little bit more being in San Francisco, obviously, newer team and all that stuff. But I think it's just like he is who he is. And unfortunately, this season, I think that means that he's a guy with, what is that, a 30% strikeout rate, which is kind of crazy for him. I mean, if there's anything, like maybe that's the thing that improves for him, right? Maybe he stops trying to be this guy to just like go for power and instead tries to go for a little bit more average again, right? That might be the trade-off that he needs to go after. And I think the weirdest thing is just, again, he's just not going, he's not walking a lot. And I don't think that's necessarily changed in I think the 3 weeks that we had that conversation. I'm kind of curious what his walk rate has been in the last couple weeks. It looks like it's been in the 8.5% range. Yeah, so really still not a whole lot has changed too much for Devers. So I mean, I think who he is right now is who he's going to be. I don't think he's necessarily going to improve a lot more, but I don't think he necessarily is going to get any worse. I mean, I think worst case scenario for him right now is maybe like, I don't know, would you say like 25 homers with a 240 average? If he ends up like that and maybe gets like 80 runs and 80 RBI, probably don't feel good about that, but at least it's not horrible.
Yeah, I mean, he would unfortunately have to pick up the pace a little bit to get to those numbers. I do think he'll pick up the pace, but like you said, I don't think anything's meaningfully changed the last few weeks. I think this was more just positive regression, from a really poor start. I was looking at his like Process Plus charts that we have for, PL Pro and staff members. And usually we look at 400 pitches, which is probably like 20 games or so. But early on in the season, you can decrease the sample to see if you can get any insights. And even like if you put it all the way down to last 200 pitches, which is probably like 10 games, his process plus is still kind of slightly below average where it's been for most of the season. So he's not necessarily, just locked in from an approach perspective, even if the numbers have been a lot better in May. So yeah, I think that, the line that he's going to put up at the end of the season, it's not really remarkable for a first baseman. And of course, he's a first base only guy now. So I do think Devers' outlook is a lot different than it was, this time last year.
Yeah, I think that's the unfortunate thing is that the positional eligibility for them hurts a lot, and I think we mentioned this last week with Bryce Harper. There's a lot of like really good young first basemen right now that are taking over the league, and for Devers to kind of he's turning 30 later this year. Um, for him to kind of just like slide just a little bit really pushes him maybe to the back end of that top 10 conversation rather than someone who would be in the top 5 conversation for first baseman.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised, his ADP could be outside the top 100 for maybe like I don't know, the first time since he was a rookie or something next season. Pretty big stock down for sure.
Yeah.
So on the pitching side, someone who has more of an up arrow next to their name for sure. Early riser was Nick's SP Roundup for Connolly early. Did have a solid start, but I'm going to be talking about someone who really dominated on the eighth. That's Dylan Cease, new Blue Jay. He was home against the Angels in this one and got the win. 7 scoreless, 5 hits, no walks, 10 strikeouts, 19 was 31% CSW on 97 pitches. And yeah, Cease was just locked in, slider. The Angels are a whiff heavy lineup, and he used his slider to absolutely demolish them. Had the gallows pull in this one and found more strikes than usual on the curve and the sinker. So, Cease, he's a guy who was really uneven last year and also is known for being more of a two-pitch guy. And it looks like he's trying to broaden out the arsenal a little bit. His sinker usage is up a couple points, and he's developed a new changeup, it looks like, with the Blue Jays. So he is rounding out the arsenal pretty nicely, and he had another good start today. I think it was right around 7 innings, 1 earned. So yeah, he's really locked in right now. Do you feel like Cease is trending towards getting the ace is going to ace label, or is he just too inconsistent to really earn that title?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like the inconsistency hasn't necessarily been too much of a struggle. I mean, he did have, let's see, 2 starts ago with giving up 4 runs, but other than that, it's been relatively smooth sailing ish. I mean, I think there's some surprising things just looking at his pitches. Like the slider's been really good this season, a 27% swing strike rate, as opposed to 22% or 23% is where it's kind of hovered the last couple seasons. So definitely some improvement there. It doesn't look like there's been any remarkable stuff change at least in terms of that slider, but the fastballs seems to be like slightly up a tick, but that might just be like early season returns as opposed to kind of looking at a season as a whole. Obviously, he's just going to be pitching faster earlier in the season, less fatigue. But yeah, I mean, I'm really impressed by the strikeout rate that it's been this good, almost 35%. And the swing strike rates are only up 1%. So there's some gains, I guess, in called strike that we're seeing with Cease. Even if that strikeout rate drops down to his career average of like 29%, I feel like he's still pretty decent. I think the only thing is just maybe that whip concern, right? That's always been Cease's issue, but I see no reason to continue going with him and not assuming that this is just a really hot start.
Yeah, I think he's running a little bit pure from like a homer per fly ball perspective. But other than that, I think that this is mostly legitimate. I do wonder, he's adding these new pitches and they don't necessarily grade well or like look really good, but just maybe they just, help keep hitters off of his 2 pitches enough, right? Like last year, it was four seam slider 82% of the time, right? This year, it's four seam slider 66% of the time, at least so far, right? So, that's a big difference, and hitters can't just necessarily pick one or pick a location and sit on those 2. So I do wonder if just diversifying the arsenal a little bit, even if it's not with, the best pitches in the world, is making a big difference for him here.
Yeah, I mean this changeup that he's added. You look at the stats; they're fairly average, right? A 15% swing strike rate, 12% CSW is pretty decent. But yeah, sorry, no, that's a 12% called strike rate. He's got a 28% CSW on it. But I mean, it seems to be doing a decent amount of work, but it's not like an elite pitch by any means. The sinker's been pretty good from a swing strike rate perspective, but it's also not necessarily. It's more of a called strike pitch for him rather than a whiff pitch. But yeah, I think it's just maybe offering something a little different to batters as opposed to just like, hey, I can expect four seam or a slider here, right? That it's changing it up is only going to help him.
Yeah, especially to lefties, I think that that's typically the handedness that he struggled with for, over the course of his career. Yeah, just a 16% strikeout minus walk against lefties for his career versus 22% against righties. So not a bad metric, but just not quite as good as he is against righties. And he's throwing that changeup like 20% of the time against
Yeah.
lefties. So yeah, just being able to broaden out that arsenal, I think is going a long way for him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, moving on to the ninth. Thanks to Kevin O'Brien for Calm Like a Bohm, the hitter recap article for an Alec Bohm, who's had an up and down season this year. But we are talking about Brent Rooker instead of the A's, who went 2 for 4 with a homer, a run, 3 RBI, and a walk. It's been a decent return from injury for Rooker, not lights out, but fine. He's slashing 216. That's the one number we don't like. 310 and 412 with 3 homers and 10 RBI through 13 games. So average that out. It's pretty good numbers, I think, over a season. But it's certainly a far cry from last year's hitter who slashed 262, 336, 480 with only a 22% strikeout rate. Since his return, he's been striking out at a 29% clip. Does have a 12% walk rate to add to that, though. But Rooker does have the reputation of a high strikeout hitter who can return value. It's only been the last 2 years that he's had this really low K rate. But now he's kind of back to who he was like 3 years ago. And again, this is only a 13 game sample. It's not awful stats. It's not great stats, but it's decent. So that being said, with Rooker, I mean, he had a slow start to the season. Obviously, the average is just not good. So he really hurts you in that category if you're in an average league as opposed to an OBP league. But can we expect Rooker to kind of return being a top 50 hitter like where he was last year for the rest of the season? Or just the ratio is just too broken this year for him to be as valuable as a hitter?
Yeah, I mean, I think that he can get back to that pretty easily, but he's also one of my most rostered players this year, right? So, I obviously liked him before, and even though we've seen some concerning stuff, I'm not going to just jump completely off. But yeah, I think I was wrong a little bit on the batting average at least. He's posted it was 246, 293, 262 the last 3 seasons. So that kind of showed me at least, what I the conclusion I came to was, yeah, he's a guy who does strike out a good amount, but with how bad batting average these days is, I don't think he's a liability, and maybe he's even a small plus. And I think that it seems more likely that he's a small minus than any kind of asset in the batting average department. So yeah, I think that that part of his profile maybe is not going to stick around for this year. But great park. He chips in, steals, and 30, 39, and 30 homers the last 3 years, right? So I'm hoping that the summer months will come around and he'll really pick up the pace. And the A's will rack up a ton of runs. So yeah, I think maybe a small batting average negative, but I think that the rest of the stats should look pretty good, and he'll get it to those top 50 hitters by season's end.
Yeah, the home away numbers for Rooker are very interesting. The homer numbers are about the same, but the average, he hits 200 at home, 175 away. I don't think we have enough games to really say like that's an official sample size, but it is something to note that is kind of interesting. But yeah, hopefully he can get more games at home, just to kind of at least bring up the power just a little bit, and consequently bring up the average as well. So we'll see how that works for Rooker. But yeah, I mean, if he can bat like 240 for the rest of the season, I think we'd probably be pretty happy, even if that's kind of below what we would hope from him on a season basis.
Yeah, and his OPS was 100 points higher at home last year too, so, I think that that's reasonable to expect. So, yeah, maybe if you've got a super deep lineup, you start Rooker every time he's at home and you start him on the road in soft matchups, but if you got a daily league and you wanna put him on your bench every once in a while until he really gets going, I think that's reasonable.
Yeah. All right, moving on to pitching. I would walk 1,000 miles from Nick, of course, referring to Michael Waka. We are talking about someone else, though. Trey Yesavage of the Blue Jays went up against the Angels in a no decision. Only 4 innings, but 0 earned runs, 4 hits, 2 walks, and 6 strikeouts. Nick's knock on Yesavage is the efficiency. Yes, it was 4 shutout innings, but it took him 87 pitches to get there. And he also needed a double play at the end of the fourth to get out of a bases loaded jam. So kind of walked away a little bit unscathed compared to what it could have been. But it's also important to remember that we really don't have that much information about Yesavage. Yeah, he had that decent playoff run last year, but this was only his sixth regular season start. He started 3 games last season in the regular season, and then he started 3 games so far in the regular season this year. He's got an incredible 0.68 ERA, but he does have a 1.35 whip to go with it. The strikeout rate's pretty decent, 26%, so that's a positive. But he also has a 94% left on base rate, and has somehow managed to give up no homers in all his regular season starts. So it just kind of feels like some negative regression is coming for Yesavage. But I'm just kind of curious, like, what do you think Yesavage looks like on a season long basis? Like, what kind of numbers would you maybe hope to expect from him if you want to consider this season like a decent season for him?
Yeah, it's hard to say if he's gonna like, they're really gonna let him go. Obviously he's been inefficient and also the pitch counts have been a little bit low. So those two make me think that it's gonna be tough for him to get to 6 innings consistently. So yeah, I think that strikeouts are gonna be his biggest asset for sure. And maybe it'll come with like a mid to high threes ERA, and hopefully he can get the whip down a little bit. But yeah, if he continues to be, this chaotic and the whip is high, that's going to really eat into his value because, yeah, I don't think that the ratios are going to necessarily be premium, but you want him to at least be passable so that the strikeouts and wins can carry the profile. So, yeah, I think that it'll be interesting to see how he progresses. And he's a three pitch guy, right? I feel like starters these days, 3 pitches is almost nothing for a starter. I feel like everybody's throwing 5 or 6 these days, so he's working with a little bit smaller of an arsenal than most guys. So that could be part of the inefficiency too. Maybe a lot of foul balls.
Yeah, it's like the new 2 pitch guy essentially. I was curious what our PL pro projections had him at. Obviously, he was injured to, not necessarily injured to start the season, but when the data came out, he wasn't injured yet. Then he became injured. 3.9 ERA with 1.27 WHIP. That's kind of what the numbers had for him, based on our PL projections. Only 105 innings. That's probably just because of the whole sample size of only 3 starts last year. 25.6% strikeout rate, so that's kind of in line with what he is right now. 9.3% walk rate, so that's a little bit of a higher projection, I think, than what he has right now. But yeah, I don't know. I think if he ends up just being like a 3.5, 3.7 arm, with maybe a tiny bit lower whip, 1.2, if that's what it takes. I don't know. I think that's fairly serviceable. I think you'd be pretty happy to have that on your fantasy team if he is able to go, let's like 150 innings for the rest of the season.
Yeah, honestly, like I'm thinking now, maybe not all that different than early career Dylan Cease, his new teammate, the guy we just talked about. Cease in 2021 with the White Sox made 32 starts, so he didn't miss a start, but he only threw 165 innings, so just over 5 innings a start, and it was a 3.91 ERA and a 1.25 WHIP, but 12.28 strikeouts per nine or a 32% strikeout rate. So I could see him doing something similar with probably a slightly lower strikeout rate, but that kind of inefficient but still, decent lines. He did go 13-7 that year. So, he was a pretty solid fantasy pitcher.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I know looking at his ground ball rate, it's a 29% ground ball rate for Yesavage. So he's not able to get those. I think we see this from pitchers. I mean, we've talked about this in the past, but like pitchers like Zach Wheeler or Sandy or Cam Schlittler this season, where they're more efficient guys because they're not necessarily going out to get strikeouts. They're just trying to get outs, whether they can get, however they can get them. Oftentimes it comes through, the ground ball. But with Yesavage, because he's not inducing a lot of ground balls, there's, less opportunities to, get those easy outs there. So I don't know if that's something with him, just like the lack of efficiency there because he can't induce ground balls. Maybe that's kind of something going on with Yesavage.
Yeah, it could be. And, might not see too many double plays either as a result.
Yeah.
So moving to the 10th, rolling into deep fly balls for a little Adele reference there for Joe Adele. I think he had a 2-homer day on Sunday. I'm going to be talking about another former high draft pick, top prospect and outfielder. That is JJ Bleday, now of the Reds. In case you didn't know, he's bounced around quite a bit. He was 1 for 2 with a triple run, 2 RBIs, 2 walks, and a steal. And it's been a short sample for Bleday. He's only made 56 plate appearances with the Reds so far, but he's making a great first impression. He's a former 4th overall pick in the 2019 draft, and he's slashing 289, 429, 644 with 4 homers and way more walks than strikeouts. So he looks locked in at the plate right now and also got his first stolen base of the season in this one. And Kyle Stanzel, the author for this one, said he wouldn't blame you if you rush a snag Bleday off the waiver wire in your fantasy leagues. I did just that. He was one of my biggest targets on the hitter side in my OCs this weekend. It looks like he's might get an everyday role even when Eugenio Suarez returns. So I'm pretty intrigued by what I'm seeing here. Do you share the sentiment? Do you think he's a must add, or are you a little bit more skeptical?
Yeah, I didn't necessarily go after him. But I mean, I'm just looking at his Statcast page. He doesn't have enough stats to like qualify just yet, but my goodness, it is crazy. He's got like you said, he's only had 38 batted ball events. And what was it, 68 plate appearances, you said?
Yeah, 56, I think.
56. Yeah, so the real incredibly low sample size, but seems like he's pulling it in the air a lot, which I mean, it can only help when you play most of your games at Cincinnati. In Cincinnati, bat speed's pretty solid, squared up rate's pretty decent. Like all these numbers are really good in this small sample size. So, I'd say if you have the opening, sure, why not? Why not add him? If it's not going to probably not going to cost you too much at this point, right? If he's not on a team already, then most likely you can get him for pretty cheap. I think it might. I'm not going to say it's going to be a stream play based on where he's playing, but obviously when he's not in Cincinnati, I'm sure his value is going to go down just a little bit. But when he's in Cincinnati, it seems like it's going to be pretty solid.
Yeah, I'm thinking of him as kind of like my fourth or fifth outfielder, and I'm starting him for the scoring periods where he's at home. And if he's away, it's going to be more matchup based. But yeah, I'm seeing some encouraging stuff. Like you said, the Statcast is great. His bat speed's way up, which is great. I think
Yeah.
some of that might be because he's pulling the ball more, and I think typically bat speeds are higher when you make contact, more on the pull side because you're further out in front. So some of that could just be a function of where he's hitting the ball, but I think it's up like 3.5 ticks, which is a huge jump. So I don't think it's exclusively that. So yeah, it seems like he's made some nice adjustments, and he was mashing in AAA too. So obviously that's not the end all be all, but it doesn't hurt to see that it's not like he was just doing this in the majors. He's carrying over a really strong AAA sample of 24 games too.
Yeah, most of his homers last season were to the pull side. But like you said, 71.7 miles per hour bat speed in 2025. 2026, it's up to 75.2 miles an hour. So obviously that's helping a lot. And his pull air rate's gone from 25% last season to almost 32% this season. So, yeah, he's definitely making an effort to do that. I think that's probably pretty clear. His fly ball rate's jumped up like over 10%, which is kind of crazy. I'm not sure how it must be a swing path thing because his ground ball rate has dropped like 13% as well. So maybe there are some real changes that he's made mechanics wise to be able to lift the ball more.
Right, and he is a 217 career hitter, and if he's hitting even more fly balls, that's not going to do a lot for the batting average. So, I think the power growth is definitely real here, but the batting average, I think that part of it kind of remains to be seen. We could see some regression there for sure.
Yeah.
So going to the pitching side, much ado Abbott, nothing for another good start for Andrew Abbott was Nick's SP roundup. I'm going to talk about someone who struggled though, and that is Gavin Williams of the Guardians. He got the loss against your Twins in this one, 6 innings, 5 earned, 10 hits, 1 walk, 6 strikeouts, 24 whiffs, and a 36% CSW on 101 pitches though. So, the pitch by pitch and the CSW not quite matching the poor line, but it's been rough lately for Williams. That's 16 earned runs over 3 of his last 4 games, even though he allowed just 7 earned runs in his other 6 games combined. So this is kind of Nick's textbook cherry bomb definition. He got really smoked by BABIP, or what we call Koufax, here in the 5th inning. 6 hits, got singled out, a ton of runs coming across the score, even though Williams was missing a ton of bats. And Nick, still feels pretty optimistic with Gavin Williams. He gets the Reds carpet this weekend, which is the Reds at home, being Cleveland at home. So it could be a good chance for him to get back on track. We're seeing a little regression here from Williams, but his season-long numbers are still pretty good. He's got a 3.74 ERA and a 1.17 WHIP with a 29% strikeout rate. So worse ERA than last year, but are you concerned at all with Williams here? I know that he was kind of a regression candidate based on his 2025 ERA estimators.
Yeah, I mean, clearly the strikeout rate's up and it seems like it's consistently up. Like the CSWs from start to start have been very, very good. Um, but he does give up a lot of balls in play. I mean, his BABIP's not anything too remarkable. It's 273 right now compared to 272 career average. I don't know. It could just be luck, right? In terms of just like getting singled out, right? Like that could be the reality here. Because his pitches, like you mentioned, on a pitch by pitch basis, they're really good. But I guess like when he gives up contact, it's not great. Curious what his ideal contact rate is. It's 41%. Um, so it's a little bit above MLB average, which isn't necessarily a good thing. Um, does give up a high number of ground balls. So it might be just a formula of like, hey, he walks a decent number of people. He gives up, some hard hits here and there, and that just leads to maybe more runs than you'd like from a top 30 pitcher.
Yeah, I do think that there is a little bit of ratio risk here, but there has been some nice skills growth. Last year he was kind of just running a little bit lucky with 84% left on base rate. That didn't I think the 306 ERA was pretty lucky when you consider a 13% strikeout minus walk rate. But now he's raised the strikeout rate 5 ticks and he's dropped the walk rate 2 ticks. So he's pushing 20% in the strikeout minus walk, which is kind of that borderline elite threshold. So yeah, I think the hard contact that he does give up when he doesn't miss bats tells me that he might not be an elite ERA guy, but I do think that he's shown some nice growth here, and obviously the strikeouts are going to help, really boost up the profile. So yeah, Williams wasn't a target of mine because I had some concerns about the control, but I'm actually, I think, more encouraged than I expected to be at this point in the season, even if he has had a couple of rough outings.
And would you say that's mainly because even though he's giving up a bunch of hits, like he's still able to get strikeouts, and that's going to really carry through his starts for the rest of the season rather than just like giving up a bunch of hits here and there.
Yeah, I think maybe the batted ball luck is, a little bit negative so far. And yeah, he's able to miss bats. And I think that he's kind of been able to do that for, when he was in the minors and in the pros, in the MLB too. So yeah, I think it's a skill that he kind of owns and he'll be able to carry it, even as he is giving up some hard contact.
Yeah. All right, well, moving on to the 11th of Rice and Ben was the hitter recap article from Ryan Amore referring to Ben Rice, which we talked about him last week. So we're going to talk about J-Rod instead. 2 for 4 with 1 homer. It was a solo shot in this one. And yeah, this was his 7th homer of the season. And if you look at his slash line right now, it's actually in line with his career averages. Currently, he's got a 269, 332, 439 versus a career line of 274, 332, 468. So just a little bit better in the slugging department, but pretty much the same in terms of average and OPP in terms of his current line compared to his career. He is a notorious slow starter. I think that's always been the knock on J-Rod. His OPS in the months of March through June is 718, but the OPS from July to September is 906. So that's just across his entire career. So it's actually kind of nuts that he also has a 200-point OPS difference between the first half and the second half of the season. Currently, OPS is actually 771, so he's kind of overperforming a little bit in the current first half of the season. I think if there's anything to be concerned about, it's that J-Rod only has 3 steals on the season. I think the chances of getting a 30-30 season are pretty much out the window for J-Rod unless somehow he picks up a ton of steals over the next couple of months. And I was looking at this line and just looking at his general rankings. Scott has J-Rod at 6th on his hitter list, so he's clearly not worried at all about kind of this slowish start for J-Rod. He's certainly not elite in terms of his counting stats right now. I don't really think there's any other decision but to hold on to J-Rod right now, but is there a certain level of player that you'd maybe be considering trading him for at this point, or is it more just like, hey, just hold him for no reason because we know it's going to get good in a couple months?
Yeah, it's tough, because he's doing better than he usually does this time of year, but at the same time, you're hoping the best is yet to come. So it's a hard guy to trade away. I was looking at the player rater on Fangraphs for the year to date, and he's like almost right next to Corbin Carroll, another kind of first round outfielder who's been decent but not great. They're both kind of in the 50s, which is definitely disappointing based on where they were drafted. So I guess maybe, you could consider that trade, but at the same time, I feel like they're similar enough players that, you wouldn't necessarily accomplish anything. Jose Ramirez is ranked like right around 40th right now. And obviously, maybe let's say you were looking to improve third base and your speed, those speed has been Jose Ramirez's best asset so far for sure. He's only hitting 210 with 6 home runs. But I think that probably the JRAM owner will probably look at the 6 homers and 16 steals compared to the 7 and 3 for Julio and say that they'd rather keep JRAM. But yeah, I mean, there is some first round guys who are sort of near him in value, but I think you just hold, like you said.
Yeah, I think that makes the most sense. I mean, if you can somehow convince someone to trade J Rod to you, I think that would be the best case alternative. But it's hard. It's hard to believe that when I think it's just so consistently he has been a second half player. I think most managers know that at this point. So being willing, it'd be pretty rare for someone to be willing to trade him based on this first 2 months of this season.
Yeah, I think he type of guy where he's showing that consistent pattern, so you should know what you're signing up for there.
Yeah. All right, moving on to pitchers. Thanks to Nick for the Manoah Get the Boat SP Roundup article referring to Alek Manoah, who is back in the majors. But we're talking about a different pitcher, Michael Soroka of the Diamondbacks, going up against Texas. Got the win here. 6.1 innings, no earned runs, 3 hits, 1 walk, and 5 strikeouts. If you take out his awful start on April 30th, which I had to experience on my fantasy rosters, Soroka would have a 2.01 ERA, a 1.12 whip, a 27% strikeout rate, and a 6% walk rate. So selective stats are always my favorite because they make guys look incredible. His four-seam and curve have been actually pretty hittable this season with high ideal contact rates, which just means, basically he's giving up more hard contact than weak contact on those types of pitches. But he's been succeeding despite that. Obviously, the ratio numbers have been pretty solid. Hard contact is just kind of the one thing that is going to be kind of troubling for Soroka. He gets good amount of whiffs, good amount of strikeouts. But overall, that's going to be the one thing that is always going to be his Achilles heel. So that being said, do we feel like Soroka still could finish the rest of the season as a top 40 pitcher, or does the hard contact just kind of make him more volatile than we like?
Yeah, I have a tough time buying into him, at that high of a ranking. The hard contact is a little bit of a concern, and so is the health. He's a guy who obviously has had a pretty injury-marred career, and I think last year, I don't know if he ended the season on the IL, but he got traded or he got hurt basically right after he got traded to the Cubs. So
Yeah.
he hasn't thrown over 90 innings, at least at the MLB level, since 2019, right? So I think, yeah, just the injury concerns combined with the decent but not great skills, have me treating him more like a streamer. Maybe the type of streamer you keep on your team because someone else might nab him if you drop him, but he's not necessarily an all starts play for me at this point, except maybe like 15 teamers, where you don't have as many options.
Yeah, Soroka for sure. Like you just look at the ratios without taking out that last start or that bad start, and it's still not bad. 3.53 ERA, 1.32 WHIP, 25% strikeout rate. But kind of like you mentioned last year, got traded to the Cubs, got hurt, ended up finishing the season as a reliever. And like you said, has not pitched over 90 innings since 2019 when he had that really good season for Atlanta. Um, yeah, and I would say, like, I think player rated rise, he's ranked 50th among starting pitchers. He's currently ranked 36th on Nick's list. And yeah, I think it's more likely that he falls rather than that he stays where he's at because of the injury concerns, and because I think he could have a couple more blow up starts very easily.
Yeah, yeah, that is a strong endorsement, though. I'm surprised he's that high on the list, but I guess he did. He's been showing some good stuff lately, and we have seen quite a few injuries. So I guess a lot of people who are just staying on the mound are moving up just because they're healthy.
Yeah, for sure.
So going to what will be our last day for today, since we're recording on Wednesday, it'll be the 12th, Tuesday the 12th. The AJ agenda for AJ Ewing's debut was Griffey Geiss's hitter recap title. I'm going to be talking about someone who was perfect, though, on Tuesday. That's Randy Arozarena, Mariners outfielder. He was 4 for 4 with 2 doubles, a home run, 4 runs, 3 RBIs, and a steal. He went off against the Astros in this one in a divisional battle, 4 hits, 3 extra base hits. 2 of them were over 100 miles per hour exit velo. And Arozarena has been fantastic this year. He's slashing 303, 389, 465, which is good for a 148 WRC plus. And this is the best offensive season he's had in a while. And I believe he's at 4 homers and 10 steals to go with it. So he's into double digits now in the stolen base department. and he's hitting over 300, which is not something we're used to from Randy Arozarena. He's more of a compiler who has a good power speed blend, but typically with a average or slightly below average hit tool. So do you think that he's showing something new this late in his career, or is this more just kind of a hot BABIP run?
To me, it feels more of a hot BABIP run. Um, his barrel rate has dropped quite a bit this season, and I'm not saying that Arozarena gets his prowess from being a power hitter, but it does help in the average department. Um, I don't know. You look at his numbers, his Statcast numbers. Again, they don't they don't predict everything. But he seems to be just kind of a middling player in terms of those numbers. Um, I mean, some improvements, if there's any, is that the striker rate has gone down. That has led to the increase in average, so maybe there's some positive stuff there. But it's hard for me to really get behind that. Like, this is a consistent thing that he can keep for the rest of the year, because he historically has never been a 300 hitter, obviously. But it was kind of funny because I was in the J Rod blurb. I was like, would you trade? I was thinking, like, would I trade J Rod for Randy Arozarena right now? I think the answer is no. And I think it's mainly because I don't necessarily believe that what Randy is doing right now is going to be consistent for the rest of the season.
Yeah, I mean, I'd throw that offer out there if I was one who had Randy, but no, I wouldn't. I wouldn't do it if I was J Rod. He's definitely, running hot from a BABIP perspective. He's pushing 400 there. He is striking out a little bit less than he has the last couple of years, so that is a nice development. But yeah, I do share your concerns about the power. His bat speed's down about 2 ticks, and he is barreling much less than usual, like you said. So yeah, I mean, if he keeps running, obviously that'll help prop up his value, but it might be a little bit of a struggle for him to kind of get to that 20 home runs that we always see from him. He's gone 2020 each of the last 5 years. So he's been super consistent in that respect. So maybe he can get back up there, but so far it's looking like more of a speed over power type season for Randy.
Yeah, and power's not the end all be all, right? You can have a really good average without being a really good power hitter, but I think it just hurts his value if he's not getting to 20 homers in a season and he, somehow maintains like a 280 average. That's still helpful, but I think you'd probably prefer more homers from Randy if possible.
Yeah, I think that's what you're counting on. So on the pitching side, overachiever for the title man, Bailey Ober himself. That is the guy we will be talking about for your Twins. It was a Maddox. He sat 88 to 89 in the four-seamer, but it didn't matter. He mowed down the Marlins anyway. 9 scoreless, 2 hits, no walks, 7 strikeouts, 14 whiffs, 31% CSW on only 89 pitches. So got the Maddox with ease. That's only 3 earned runs in total in 4 of his last 5 starts over 27 innings pitched. So obviously, when you see, a 2-hitter with a shutout, there's going to be some batted ball luck. He was putting away guys great on 2 strikes, and 20 out of 22 balls in play were outs, which is something that we should definitely not count on. But he really located his four-seam and changeup combo well to lefties. He tunnels them really well together and had an 82% weak contact rate. So he was keeping people off of the barrel all day long. And he was also locating his other secondaries well, the sweeper, the slider, and the cutter. So Nick feels like he can have his moments, but with this diminished stuff we've seen from Ober, it's more of a situation where he had a great start and he's in a good run, but Nick feels like he can't keep getting away with this, with this much worse stuff, and forecast, some rough regression on the horizon. So obviously this is your Twins guy, and I would be surprised if you were expecting this, just given, Ober's uneven season and low velo so far. But what are you making of this? It's not every day you see a pitcher throw a Maddox, so it's, you can't just dismiss it. But where are you at now on Ober?
Yeah, definitely impressive from Ober. The Marlins are not a horrible team. They're not a good team, but they're not a horrible team. So, this wasn't just like Ober taking advantage of a relatively weak matchup. I do think for him it's going to be location based, right? When you don't have the stuff, you don't have the velocity, right? He's still in this game through 71 out of 89 pitches. So what is that? 80% of his pitches were either the changeup and the four seamer. Very much a guy who he's always been Blake Snell blueprint, right? But the problem with him is that the only breaking pitch he has is the changeup, or just the only non-fastball pitch he has is the changeup. So he needs to locate those pitches perfectly, I think, in order to be able to walk away with a good start. And I don't know, we just saw him kind of flail against the Nats in the start before. Um, I just it'd be really risky for me to consider having him on a fantasy team because you just don't know how good he's going to feel on that specific day because we know he doesn't have the velocity, he doesn't have the stuff anymore. The changeup is still decent, but everything else is just not good. So I think it's awesome that he did this. I think the last time a Twin did it was Irvin Santana in like 2013. So it's been a while for the Twins to see something like a Maddox, and it's definitely impressive. But at the end of the day, I'm still a stay away from Ober.
Yeah, it's, he's a guy that I've really loved in the past, so I wish I could get more behind it. But yeah, the list of especially right-handed starting pitchers who can succeed with this type of velocity and, like this decade is like Kyle Hendricks is the only one that I can think of, right? And we saw his career, come to an end last year because his stuff, wasn't good enough, right? So it would be really challenging for him to continue to have a good run with this level of velo. So yeah, I do share your concerns. I think that there's regression probably soon to come, and the strikeouts, the ceiling isn't very high. So yeah, I would say maybe you can still pick your spots here and there, but I'm pretty concerned as well.
Yeah, I'm just surprised. I mean, I've said this for years. For a guy who's 6'9", it's actually incredible that his fastball like never went higher than 93 miles an hour, like on average. So it's just so weird that he just can't generate any velocity. And he's not an over the top pitcher, so he doesn't necessarily always take advantage of that height, but nonetheless it is surprising how he's just always been this low fastball velocity guy and was able to get it done. But when you drop 2 ticks on your fastball, like that's just going to hurt you in so many ways.
Right. There's only so much room you have, to go down when you're already a middling velocity guy.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's going to wrap it up for our player performances. And moving on to streamers now. We've got some updates from a couple guys 2 weeks ago. And then also some starts haven't happened yet because we're recording this a little bit earlier. But yeah, how's our streamer record looking?
Yeah, I think we're going to save the recap for the most recent group that I gave out till next week because all those guys either are going today or haven't gone yet. So we'll do a quick recap of 2 weeks ago. I'm calling it 2-2, 2 wins, 2 losses to go to 7 wins, 6 losses, and 3 pushes on the year. Jameson Tyone, he had 2 starts, 11 innings, 9 Ks, 3 earned, and a 1.09 whip, but no wins or quality starts. Calling that one a win because of the good ratios. Jansen Junk, I think, was just barely a loss. 11 and a third, 12 Ks, 5 earned, 1.24 whip, but also no wins or quality starts. So slightly negative ratios with no wins to help you. So, just a loss there. Kate Cavalli was the worst of the group. 2 starts, 9 2/3 with only 6 strikeouts and 5 earned and a 1.34 whip with no wins or quality starts. So that's an easy loss there. And then his teammate Foster Griffin was a big win. He went 7 innings of 1-run ball against the Marlins with 9 strikeouts, got the win and the quality start. So 2 wins, 2 losses there. And going to this week coming up, a lot of young guys and a lot of 2-steps is what we have on the docket here. First one is J.R. Ritchie. He was supposed to get a 2-step this week, but it got moved to next week. It's going to be at Miami and home against the Nationals. I know his schedule got bumped before, but this one's more likely to stick because it's a 7-game week and he's projected to start Monday. This is more of a wins play. He only went 4 1/3 tonight and got pulled around 90 pitches, so he's not likely to get a quality start, but for wins, I think he's got a good chance. Christian Scott of the Mets, 32% CBS, 17% Yahoo. He gets 2 starts, the same teams, but both on the road at Washington first and then at Miami. More of a strikeouts play with maybe more ratio risk. Andrew Painter, another NL East arm. I guess that's the theme for this one so far. 15% CBS, 16% Yahoo. He gets the best matchups, I think, even if he hasn't been the best pitcher. 2 home starts against Cincinnati and Cleveland, so I think those will both be, good matchups and win chances. And then lastly, for your deeper formats, JT Ginn, 11% CBS, 12% Yahoo. He gets 2 road starts at LA and at the Padres, LA being the Angels, just to be clear there. And they're both bottom half offenses against righties. And Ginn is probably a better option on the road because they have a tough home park. So those are the 4 guys. And then I just did want to highlight the Diamondbacks have a great schedule next week. They have 7 home games, 3 at home against the Giants and 4 at home against the Rockies. So, pretty weak road offenses there. So, their guys are a little bit more highly rostered, so I couldn't include them here, but just, check and see what Giants arms might be out there for you.
Yeah. Going
Or
back to the
Giants
guys you
guys, excuse me.
suggested, going back to the guys you suggested 2 weeks ago, Foster Griffin, I know you wrote about him in the Is It Legit article that came out today. I have him in, I think, one of my leagues. He's been interesting. I'm kind of curious whether he's the guy that you would consider holding on to. Obviously you wrote the article about it, but yeah, is he someone that you'd be kind of considering to stick on your roster for the time being?
Yeah, I'm holding on to him, but it's more of I'm gonna ride until the wheels fall off than I think that, what he's showcasing is gonna carry over all year. He is, classic crafty lefty. He's got a 7 pitch arsenal, which is super cool. And he's been excellent, especially his last 3 starts. So I'm a little scared for, at the Reds tomorrow, Great American. I'm hoping that, the homers don't start flying on him. But yeah, I think the conclusion I came to is I'm gonna, stay with him for now, but it's probably not legit was kind of my conclusion there. I think he's gonna regress to more of like a streamer type over the course of the year.
Yeah. All right. And then, yeah, with the guys this week, or I should say next week, yeah, Painter has been unfortunately uh, not super fun this year. I mean, I know there was a
Yeah.
lot of hype for him to start of the season. And Christian Scott's one of those arms who, like, if he puts it all together, it'd be really, really fun. But right now, yeah, he's still just more of a guy who gets a lot of strikeouts. And unfortunately, with the state of the Mets, even when you have a 2-star week against the Nats and in Miami, it is not 2 guaranteed wins like it used to be in years past.
Yeah, 5 innings of 1 run ball today for Painter at least, but as the area is still above 6, right? So this is the type of thing where I feel like he's gonna regress positively, and it's not based on, the strength of what he's done so far. So yeah, I think he's probably the third in the pecking order there for a reason, but I do feel okay about it.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's going to wrap it up for our episode this week. You can find us on This Week PL on Twitter. Send us your comments and questions at thisweekplpod@gmail.com. You can find myself on Twitter at the John Cuh. You can find Patrick at pfitzgerald_99. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the Pitch List podcast feed on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever else you listen to your podcast, and leave us a 5-star review if you enjoy the show. Lastly, sign up for Pitch List Pro. By doing so, you can join us in the Pitch List Discord and get advice from all of the fantasy experts and writers over there. That's all for this week. We'll be back next week with another episode of This Week in Fantasy Baseball. For Patrick, I'm John, and we'll see you in the next one. Later, everyone.